Thank you. And we continue with the theme. We're going to be really cheered up this time by another collapse. Someone's going to come and say, all is well, don't worry, but I'm afraid this isn't the one. So Jean's going to give us hope and talk about all the fantastic work that she's been doing and inspired me. And of course, I've never had a slide before which says, "Oh, Jean." So here's "Oh, Jean." Thank you.
Thanks, Danny.
Yeah, of course.
All right. All right, so my name is Jean Twenge. If you can't remember how to pronounce my last name, it's Twenge Guitar. Or you can call me Jean, or you can call me Dr. T, which is my students call me. A semester isn't long enough for them to learn how to pronounce my name, so that's how I do it. So I research generational differences. That is the cover of my first book, Generation Me, about millennials. And no, that's not my stomach. I'll go that up right off the bat. Very important to know. So I first started looking into these issues around adolescent mental health and their links to technology in 2017. And that's my book, iGen, about Gen Z, with that really long subtitle, because there's so many interesting trends to discuss about this group. And then updated that and looked at all 6 living American generations in my next book. And I have 3 teenage kids, so the collision of my research life and my life as a parent resulted in my most recent book, which, as Danny mentioned, one of the rules is no smartphone until you get your driver's license. And I have a child who is taking her driving test on Wednesday. So thus, she does not have a smartphone yet. So she really hopes that she passes that driving test. So people love to talk about generations, so I always like to start there to put us in the mindset of thinking of change over time, changes in the culture and what they mean. So one term that many people have heard is baby boomers. And if you don't mind, can we see by show of hands, how many baby boomers do we have in the room? Awesome, so keep your hands in the air for just a minute so the rest of the room can see that not all of you look like these people. At least not today, so thank you. So boomers were the hippies of the 60s, then the yuppies of the 80s, and are still many of our leaders across different fields. So then we have Generation X, happens to be my generation. How many of my fellow Gen Xers are out there? Ooh, a lot of us today. Generational bonus points if you can name the movie. Ooh, that was quick, that's right. Reality Bites, 1994, came out, around the time we got our reputation for being slackers, if you remember that. Okay, then we have millennials. How many millennials do we have in the room? Usually I get a woohoo with millennials. I think that fits. There you go. I think that fits. Took me some time to find a good picture for millennials. I like this one because it has some of the technology. They also kind of look like they're in Brooklyn, like they just ate some artisanal cheese, or maybe some avocado toast. That's an internet rumor. Okay, then we have Gen Z. How many Gen Zers do we have in the room? Good. We need to start getting a woohoo for the Gen Zers, too. Hasn't happened yet. We'll get there. So Gen Z is the first generation to spend their entire adolescence in the age of the smartphone, and that's had ripple effects across many areas of their lives. So, of course, there's a generation after Gen Z coming up, but we have a problem. We ran out of letters. What are we going to do now? So go back to the beginning of the alphabet, use the Greek alphabet, call them alphas, a lot of people do. I'm not a huge fan of the letters, so I call this group polars, after melting polar ice caps and political polarization. That groan is what I always get. So I don't think it's going to catch on. That's okay. Gen Z actually has a name already for this group younger than them. They call them crusty iPad kids. And it's true, first generation and never know a world without the iPad, and apparently they don't wash their hands before they use it, and that is how it becomes crusty. So there's a lot written about generations in newspapers, online, there's a lot of debates about it, there's books on it. Well, when I first started to look into this stuff, there wasn't a whole lot of data. But to me, that's the best way to go, is to get actual data, to ask people, particularly young people themselves, how they spend their time, how they're feeling, what's important to them. And many large nationally representative data sets have done that. Even better, some of them go back decades, and that is really powerful because it means we can compare different generations when they were young. We can take age out of the equation and zero in on what's actually different in terms of being a young person now versus what it used to be like. And we do have a lot of data now. About 43 million people is what I analyzed in one survey or another in the paperback edition of Generations. So I have been doing this work on generational differences for a really long time. I started when I was an undergrad myself, and I got used to seeing generational differences that were big, but they would take a decade or two to get there. Then about 13 years ago, I started to see changes that were bigger and more sudden. I had really never seen anything like it. So for example, more and more teens started to say that they felt left out. More started to say that they felt lonely. More started to say they felt like they couldn't do anything right, that they didn't enjoy life, that their life wasn't useful. And it turns out this extends to more serious issues like major depressive episode, clinical level depression that really requires treatment, doubled among 12 to 17-year-olds in the US, and it did that before the pandemic. And then within a few years, that extended to young adults, 18 to 25 as well. And it is not just symptoms. It is behaviors like emergency room admissions for self-harm have doubled among 15 to 19-year-old girls and young women and have quadrupled among 10 to 14-year-old girls. We also see that increase in the suicide rate, which has doubled over this same time period. And we see it in more everyday things too, like happiness. Happiness had actually been on the rise among American teens until all of those gains were wiped out after 2012. The high school seniors are asked things like, are you satisfied with yourself? That had been on a slow rise since the 1970s until it just fell off a cliff around 2012. Same thing with being satisfied with your life as a whole. So this is US data, but we do see this worldwide. So in the PISA survey, there's questions about feeling lonely at school. So you see that across almost every single country. Here's just a few examples: Mexico, New Zealand, France, and the UK, where there's really not a lot of change until 2012. I know this is a little hard to see, but this is just a portion of a recent paper looking at the health behavior of school-aged children study, mostly gets data from Europe, and those solid lines are psychological complaints. The red is for girls, the blue is for boys, and across every single one of these countries, that's what you see in that pattern after, in this case, I don't have 2012, but 2010, you see that uptick pretty universally. And again, you also see it in behavior. So I'll take Australia as an example. Hospitalizations for self-harm went up in Australia during that period, and so did the suicide rate for teen girls and young women. So this is always the question. You see all of this data, and I showed you even just a fraction of what's out there, and almost all of it shows that turning point around 2012 or so. So what happened? What happened in 2012? So when I first started to see this, I had no idea. First, I thought it might be a blip. Didn't look like it was the economy. It's completely misaligned with economic trends, as Danny showed you. So what could it be? There wasn't any event that happened then that kept going. I puzzled over this for a really long time. It was really a complete mystery at first. Then one day I came across a poll from the Pew Center, and things started to fall into place. Because one thing that happened around the end of 2012 was this happened. That was the first time the majority of Americans owned a smartphone. So the first smartphone was introduced in 2007. Most people had one by the end of 2012. That is the fastest adoption of any technology in human history. And it can go into social situations, as you see here in the picture. And it just was different. It was different than just a few years before. See, in 2009, because you remember what we had back then? We had flip phones, which just weren't that interesting. You know, you used to have to press the same button 3 times to get one letter on a text. Remember that? Or you'd take a selfie, be like, send me my dog. Just wasn't interesting. Didn't have social media on it, wasn't in color. Because of course it's not just the device, it's not just the smartphone, it's what people do on the smartphone. So for example, US high school seniors, across demographic groups, those who said they used social media every day moved from about half to almost everybody. So it moved from optional to feeling almost mandatory during that time period. And more recently, Gallup did a poll of teens and found among these 6 activities, the only one that the vast majority of teens spent 2 or more hours a day on was social media. And the average teen now spends almost 5 hours a day using social media. That's what Dr. Murthy was mentioning, and that includes TikTok and YouTube. And that's just social media. It's not other types of screen time. So what did that replace? So that was a question I had pretty early on. There's a lot of time on these devices. That's got to be crowding out time for other things. What about people getting together in person? So in the American Time Use Survey, time socializing in person among teens and young adults has nearly been cut in half. Now, there's also been a change for older people, but not by quite as much. It slid, but the biggest effect has clearly been among Gen Z, for teens and young adults. And we really starkly see this in the data from teens, where the number who hang out with their friends every day has also been cut in half. The number who go to parties once a month or more has also plummeted. And once Gen Z goes to college, sometimes even when they do go to a party, it ends up looking like this. That's kind of a classic old school Gen Z meme there. And I know it was a Gen Z college student who made that. The other thing that technology can often interfere with is sleep. And sure enough, in 2 different surveys asking the question in different ways, you get a huge increase in not getting enough sleep, with the turning point right in that time period at about 2012. So, it's academia. The minute you make an argument, someone is going to say that you're wrong. So what are some of the counter arguments? Now this can be good. It can mean we can learn from this. We can consider those alternative explanations, bring it out into the open, have the debate. It can be a very good thing. So one of the first ones was this. Now this one struck me as odd. Oh, it's just diagnoses, it's just help seeking, it's more willingness to report symptoms, coding changes. That was one of the earliest arguments. Well, that data that I showed you on clinical level depression, that's not from doctor diagnoses. That's from these surveys. It does use the DSM criteria, but it's a cross-section of everybody, whether they've sought help or not. So overdiagnosis, help seeking just is not what is going on there. We know that for sure, yet I still hear people making that argument. Okay, can it be they're more willing to admit to issues? Well, in survey data, you don't usually see that where it's, oh, all of a sudden people are more willing to admit to issues. It just doesn't happen. So I was immediately skeptical. The strongest argument is this, though. If that was the case, we wouldn't see any changes in more objectively measured behaviors, like self-harm, like hospitalizations for suicide attempts, like completed suicides. None of that would be there if it was the willingness to admit to issues that was driving all of it. Yet we do see that. Hey, the most recent pushback on this has been changes in coding. So Danny mentioned Janet Curie, and she was an author on one of the papers that made this argument. So there was a change in the coding for self-harm in 2015, but you don't see a sudden change in 2015. It's not that there's nothing, and then 2015, and then it goes way up. It just doesn't look like that. It goes up starting about 2010 pretty steadily, as you saw in that data. The other piece is a coding change would affect everybody of all ages, right? Okay, so here's what we got for 15 to 19 and 10 to 14. That's what I showed you before. So notice it's not that, there's a sudden change at 2015. If anything, it's a little flat at 2015. Also, you don't get it at all in the older age groups. So that, I think, kills that argument right there. It's not the coding changes. All right. Clicker stopped working. Okay. There we go. So this is the other argument I heard very, very commonly. You can't say that it's smartphones and social media. It could be anything. All right, well, let's consider some of those anythings. Is it the Great Recession? Nope, it's not. There's depression, there's smartphone adoption, there's time online. Those increase in lockstep with each other. So if it was economics, you'd think unemployment would go up along with it. More people are unemployed, the economy's bad, people are going to be depressed, and it's exactly the opposite. So that clearly was not what was going on. I hear this one a lot. Okay, it's school shootings. That's why people are depressed. That's why they're anxious. Well, first of all, the time sequence is wrong. Those started to go up in the 90s. And in the 90s, mental health was either stable or improving in the millennial population, say, back then. You don't see that. You see the sudden change happening around 2012. It's not that school shootings suddenly started then. Here's the other thing. We wouldn't see it in international data because, fortunately, in other countries, they don't have that problem as much as we do here in the US in terms of school shootings. So that doesn't fit. Climate change. Well, climate change is international. And there's a bunch of counter arguments to this. Here's one I think is particularly strong. Why would climate change increase loneliness? I can see how you can maybe make a case for increasing anxiety, but again, the time sequence is wrong. There certainly was a lot of awareness of climate change starting in the 70s. Climate concern and concern around the environment in high school students, do you know when it peaks? It peaks in the 90s. It doesn't peak recently. 2006 with Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth, that was another time you'd think it would spike. Nope. Suicide rates among young people and a lot of other indicators were actually at a low point during that time. So that's not what is going on. Plus, it really doesn't make a lot of sense that it would increase loneliness. But social media and spending less time with friends in person, it makes perfect sense that then you get an increase in loneliness. Plus, if it was climate change or even any kind of world event, you'd expect awareness around those types of bigger issues that would have the biggest impact on young adults, not on the youngest. And we see exactly the opposite pattern. The biggest increases, like self-harm, for example, as you saw, was among 10 to 14-year-olds, not among the older age groups where this is going to be more of a focal point. I've heard this one a lot, including in The Atlantic, including from some experts on adolescence, who, though, apparently have not actually looked at the data. They just assume that kids and teens have more homework now. Well, at the elementary school grades, they do. Middle school and high school, though, unchanged or down. It's actually down significantly among 8th graders. And that's, again, where we see the biggest increase in depression. There's also not an increase in students saying there's a lot of competition for grades at their school. So that one doesn't fit. Oh, I hear this one all the time, the doomsayer. But the world is so terrible now. It is so awful now. How can you say it's phones? Everything else is so bad. Well, was it really increasingly terrible from 2011 to 2019? I mean, in 2019, we didn't know how good we had it right before COVID struck, right? Think about that. And then was that time really worse than 2008 in the middle of the Great Recession? Was it really worse than 1993, which was when violent crime had an enormous peak in the US? 2001, when September 11th happened? I think, objectively, probably not. And every generation has its challenges. Every time has its challenges. The question is, how do people react to it? And that's the other piece, too. Historically speaking, the reaction of people, particularly young people, to crisis isn't depression, it's action. It's let's do something about it. So I think that explanation doesn't fit either. I'll go through a few others briefly. The opioid epidemic, the timing actually does line up on that, but a lot of other stuff doesn't. That mostly affected middle-aged people, not young people. And, okay, you could say it was their parents, but it was pretty regional. And that increase in depression is not regional across the US. And also that doesn't work for the international data, again, because that opioid crisis was more unique to the United States. All right, so one of the Surgeon General was saying this one, marijuana use. It's up among young adults, so maybe there we could look at it. It is unchanged or even down among teens, so that can't be it. I hear this one a lot. Okay, their families are in crisis, parents are depressed. Let's look at that. We've got data on that in the National Study of Drug Use and Health. Well, we saw that, 12 to 17-year-olds. Okay, so we can't bin the age groups as precisely as I'd like in this study, but we can get 35 to 49. That's the most likely to have children in this age group. So those in that age group who do not have children at home and who do, So parents in this age group, it's flat, while for their children, it's doubling. So it really comes down to this. Other than smartphones, social media, the changes in those technologies, nothing else had such a big impact on teens, on that age group, so universally. Plus, it's not just that. Those changes in how they spent their time, it's not something they read about or that happened to their parents. It is something that had an impact on them every single day for hours at a time. You think about it this way, spending more time on screens, less time with friends in person, less time sleeping. That is a pretty terrible formula for mental health. And it makes sense too, that it would have the biggest impact on them. Social media in particular, for teens, that's going to be where they're going to be looking for status, where they're going to be looking at fitting in with friends. That's all important at that developmental stage. It's going to have an impact. Plus, again, it's not just what they're doing, it's what they're not doing. Social interaction, sleep, getting outside and exercising, which we've talked about. My favorite thing with that is that Gen Z knows that. And you know what Gen Z's advice for what they call the chronically online is? Go touch grass. Isn't that the best advice ever? And that's a Gen Z piece of advice. And I also come back to this process of elimination. If it's not smartphones and social media, what is it? Nothing else really fits. Okay, so I hear this all the time, particularly among my own people, social and personality psychologists. We looked at the group level there. What about the individual level? Those who spend more time on social media, are they more likely to be depressed? So what's often said is, yeah, but it's small, that the effect is small. So I'll show you a few studies here and one meta-analysis, and you can decide for yourself if you think these effects are small. UK 14-year-olds, social media use. This was a few years ago, before 5 hours a day was the average. Back then it was more like 2. A questionnaire on depressive symptoms, 13 questions, and above a certain level, that's the cutoff. Like Danny was mentioning with the PHQ, where then that's probably where they're going to refer you to see a mental health professional. So it's above that cutoff here. So among girls, heavy users of social media were 3 times more likely to be above that cutoff in depressive symptoms. Pattern's a little bit different for boys. You don't get the rise right away, but once you get to 3 to 4 hours, and especially 5, that is still a doubling of the percentage of boys who fit those clinical criteria. Recent data from Monitoring the Future among 8th and 10th graders, and we see a very similar pattern, if not more pronounced now for boys, almost a doubling in depression rates between those who are light or non-users compared to heavy users. This is a survey that the Surgeon General cites very often, Dr. Murthy, where you have hours per day using social media, and you get a tripling of internalizing, meaning things like depression, and externalizing things like anger and aggression. Internalizing only, you get a doubling. This is a recent CDC report, and I want to bring this out because this is a counter argument I hear quite frequently, that social media is a lifeline to gay and lesbian and bisexual and questioning kids, especially in more rural areas where maybe they don't know many people like them and they want to find those connections. Well, that may be true. They may find those connections, but more is not better. You see the same link between heavier social media use and depression that you do for straight kids. So the idea that, they spend all this time online, it's really, really good for them. We shouldn't ever ban or restrict social media because those kids will be in trouble. Nope, they'll be better off, just like the straight kids. So here's the meta-analysis. It found a 13% increase in the risk of depression with each additional hour of social media use. So that means you go from 0 to 5 hours, you get a 65% increase in risk, 0 to 7 hours, a 91%, or almost a doubling in risk. Pretty consistent with those studies that I showed you. And just to give you a very brief primer on the stats here, RR is relative risk, commonly used in medical journals, public health journals, looking at risk, and an RR of 2 corresponds to a 100% increase or a doubling. So what I found, just more of a narrative review looking at the literature, this is very common, that you get from none or light use to heavy use between a 50% and a 200% increase in risk of depression. Yet you still get plenty of people saying these are small. Sometimes it's a stats issue. They're using different types of statistics, like they're using linear R. Okay, let's look at linear R. So from that UK study of 14-year-olds, that is the correlation between social media use and mental health indicators among girls. 0.2. Now, in social and personality psychology, sometimes that is a correlation that is dismissed as small. Well, how does it compare to other public health indicators? I'll show you one. Childhood lead exposure and adult IQ has an R of 0.11. So the folks who are saying, hey, you know, we shouldn't worry about this, it's not really that big. Well, I guess we shouldn't worry about lead in water either. I'll show you another example to illustrate this. In the youth risk survey administered by the CDC, they used to have a really general question, 2021 and before, about device use. And then they have a question on suicide attempts. So this is the link between them. And you know, it's a little bit of a curve because we're talking about all device use, not just social media. And the really big spike with the heaviest use. So here's what that looks like. If you analyze this data for a medical or public health journal, you would probably use relative risk or odds ratio, and you would say, look, there's a doubling between 1 hour a day of use and that heavy use of 5 or more hours a day, twice as likely to have had a suicide attempt at some time in the past. If you analyze that same data using linear R or regression, as would happen in most psychology or sociology journals, you get an R of 0.07. If you squared that R, as is sometimes done to create a statistic called percent variance explained, which has a lot of problems, but we'll get to that, it comes to that, 0.49. So what folks would say in my own field, they would explain it this way. Now, this reasoning has many flaws to it, but one of the biggest flaws is that doesn't capture what's actually going on here. It doesn't capture that doubling of risk. When I show this to a lot of crowds, especially in psychology, this is the basic reaction. What? How could it be that you could have that huge relative risk elevation and such a small linear R? And that was my reaction. And then I went, wait a second, maybe that's why medicine and public health is convinced that we have this link, and psychology, at least a certain minority, is not convinced. You know, is it just these few examples? You know, how much does this happen? So we're talking about seatbelts, right? That's a great example of a public health thing where minds were changed. Let's look at the data on wearing a seatbelt and whether you're going to die in a car accident. So among seatbelt wearers who got in a car accident, 0.65% died. No seatbelt, more than 2% died. So that's a relative risk of more than 3. So that's important, right? That if you wear a seatbelt, that's going to help. That's going to help a lot. That's going to really cut your chances of dying in a car accident. The conclusion's obvious. Not wearing a seatbelt triples your risk of dying in a car accident. Seatbelts save lives. We know this. This is why we have seatbelt laws. That is, again, a correlation, though, of 0.07. The R squared is 0.5, less than 1%. So psychologists who have talked about social media and mental health, their conclusion from this data would be this. Seatbelts aren't really important. Might as well take them off. Forget about the laws. We shouldn't have that. They're not seeing the whole picture that you see when you look at relative risk. And the same is true for social media and mental health. Here's an even starker example. Smoking and lung cancer. That is a relative risk of 25. It is enormous, that difference between not smoking and smoking and the chances that you're going to get lung cancer. Shouldn't be smoking. That's a correlation of 0.06. Might as well light up, right? Because that correlation is taking into account all of the randomness involved in getting cancer, all of the randomness involved in a car accident, all of the randomness and other factors involved in mental health. It is not capturing the elevation of risk. So I think we have to think about that. Report both of those, for example. The other thing that these studies leave out, which is enormous, is that social media and smartphones and all of these devices have an effect even on the people who are not using them. So a teen who doesn't use social media, who's in that none group, yeah, they have better mental health. They're not experiencing that displacement of sleep, of in-person social interaction, of exercise, and that toxicity and social comparison and all the mechanisms we've been talking about. But they may miss out on some conversations. They may miss out on some social events if that's where they're posted. They miss out on some videos and discussions that their friends might have. There may be some negative impacts there too. So it's a no-win situation. This is what teens and a lot of college students tell me. They say, I want to cut back on social media. I even want to give it up, but that's where my friends are. I have the fear of missing out. I have all of these issues around, if I get rid of it, then I have these other things blowing back. That in-person social interaction piece, it's social. Social media is social. In-person social interaction is social. It's a group level problem. That teen who, say, wants to get together with their friends on a Saturday night, well, that's no longer the social norm. Who are they going to hang out with when all of their friends are at home in their rooms alone on Instagram? And then as you see in the picture, that's what you get too. You get people in person, and the phone interferes with that. So there's a word for that, by the way, when you're talking to someone and they take out their phone. It's called phubbing. It's a combination of phone and snubbing. Everybody does it, and everybody hates it. And we'll dig into this later this afternoon as well. It is not just mental health that has started to deteriorate. It's also test scores. So 8th graders, the long-term view is that increase, and then they start to go down, and we're seeing this worldwide as well in the PISA data. So what do we do? I'll say a few things about this, and then we can discuss policy changes. We've already heard some about that today, some fabulous ideas. So no phones during the school day, bell to bell for K through 12, I think is one of the fantastic ideas in this area. It's not enough. Laptops, as a parent, the school laptop is the bane of my existence. I know, right? You cannot put parental controls on it. It is required by the school. They give it to each student. In the middle schools in my district, so I have an 8th grader, they said you can't bring personal laptops to school, which I get. I understand why they made that rule. But that means that she's doing her homework on her school laptop. Well, guess what her school laptop has on it? So if you're not a parent with teen kids, you might think that laptop has, Canvas, Blackboard. Maybe it has Synergy. Maybe it has some kind of platform for a couple of videos. Maybe it has Google Docs, and that's it, right? Parents, those of you who clapped, is that what they have on them? No. What do they have on them? They have YouTube, often unrestricted. I just found out literally last week that my daughter was watching TV on her school laptop, which I can't put parental controls on, because it allowed her to access Disney+. Oh, she's watching Disney cartoons. Oh no, it has all ABC content. She was watching a show called The Rookie, which is really violent, and she gave me a detailed description, which I won't even share with you because it was so gross, about one of the crimes that was committed on that show. And she's 13 years old. So this is the problem. We've got these school laptops that come home that interfere because parents don't have any idea what their kids are doing. Mom, I'm doing my homework. How do we know that? Unless we're hovering over them the whole time, that they're doing that instead of watching TV or on YouTube. We don't. And teachers have this problem too. that if that school laptop is not locked down, then maybe they're watching Disney Plus during the school day when they're supposed to be paying attention. Maybe they're watching YouTube or they're playing games. I don't know what has gone on. I don't know what disconnect there is with school districts, but they're not locking down these laptops like they need to be. And the research suggests, as John said in his talk, it's not great for learning. We thought one-to-one devices was going to be great for learning, and it's not. It's not. So we really got to figure this out. You know, not give as many assignments that require that laptop. Maybe this should be something that we don't start in elementary school or even middle school. Maybe put off those devices until high school, and even then, lock them down, do stuff on paper. It's not a great benefit to doing stuff on paper. Then ChatGPT didn't write it. Or at least they had to handwrite what ChatGPT said. Some kind of progress. I'm really behind this of raising the minimum age for social media to 16 and actually verifying age. So Australia's done this, some other states have done this. This is a way to get around the First Amendment and other arguments against these types of laws is, oh, they can look at content. We're not restricting necessarily their access to content. They just can't open the account. Well, I prefer they didn't do any of it as a parent. However, if you don't open the account, then you don't have the algorithm that's feeding you what it thinks you want to see. They're not using your data. You're not getting the push notifications for every second of every day and night, all that kind of stuff. Or maybe they can have an account, but the feed is chronological instead of algorithmic. Lots of compromise positions here. At the very least, can we do this? Common Sense Media found they tracked kids' phones, not even self-report, they tracked what kids were doing on their phones. 6 out of 10, 11 to 17-year-olds used their phones between midnight and 5 a.m. on school nights. 6 out of 10. So that has got to stop. That is the one thing I think everybody can agree on is that we don't need kids on their phones in the middle of the night, especially not on social media in the middle of the night. You can think of certain situations where they might need their phone, an emergency phone call or something like that, but what situation would you need to be on Instagram or TikTok at 2 a.m.? It's really tough to think of that scenario. So restricting that. And, I would love this if this could happen. Of some sort of box you can check, because this does not exist as far as I know. I set up my kids' Mac laptops, and it was really tough to figure out how to set it up for a kid and put the parental controls in place. It was a days-long exercise in frustration during the setup on a Mac. Why is there not just a box you can check saying it's for a kid? You make things so much easier. So my new book is about these 10 rules for parents. I'll just show them all to you at once. I won't go through each one of them. But just thinking about the things that parents can do. And I start out, and I always feel like I have to start out saying parents are in a really tough position with this. It is spectacularly unfair that this is all on us. We should have more regulation in this area. Schools should be doing a better job with the technology they send home with kids to have it be more locked down. Government needs to be doing more things, the companies themselves, all of this. But this is where we are right now until we get more of that. We're it. We have to be the ones who are doing these regulations. Among these 10 rules, my favorite and the one that I suggest everybody does of all ages, so not just kids, but all adults as well, is number 2, no electronic devices in the bedroom overnight. Now, some of your students, if you're living in a dorm and you're like, oh, I can't do that. Well, you could, though, turn your phone all the way off, not just on Do Not Disturb, but off, put it in a pencil case and zip it, put it in a backpack and zip it, and shove it in the corner of your room. If you're lucky enough to have a bedroom where you can put stuff outside, then do that, put it downstairs. If you're a parent with teen kids, that's the rule. Everybody's phone goes on the kitchen counter. You're afraid your kid's going to sneak down, buy a lockbox. We have 6 of these in our house, and they're for dessert. They're for Girl Scout cookies. That's how I know how those work. Haven't had to use them for phones yet, but that time may be coming. So you can do that. Some parents I know say, well, put it in my room, and then my kids can't access it. Now, I know what you're going to say to this. You're going to say, but I have to have my phone in my bedroom overnight because it's my alarm clock. I have some advice for you. Buy an alarm clock. You can buy it on Amazon on your phone and then put your phone away and get a good night's sleep. Thank you.
Super as ever. I had a thought, and your number 2 up there was quite good. We've talked about sort of 6 to 18-year-olds, and we talked a little bit ago about 23-year-olds, but there's a group in between, which are these guys.
Yeah.
And I always had in my head, so that the YRBS number, which is that 52% of basically high school girls say they're sad or hopeless. So we inherit that. And so the question I'm trying to think about is, okay, so then we measure the well-being of our students. And the question I'll keep addressing in my head is, well, is what we're observing something that we just inherited? Or are we actually doing something, right? So in a sense, going forward, hopefully with the things you've talked about, as time goes on, we won't inherit it. But obviously you might think that those that we take who come in with bad mental health or say they're sad or hopeless, those people are going to do really badly. And this sounds terrible, but in some sense in our admission criterion, we shouldn't take them. You see where I'm going with that?
I do. I don't agree.
But you know what I mean? You could say people
Yeah.
will say, my goodness me, as a predictor of how well they're going to do. Imagine if I say, let's predict what their GPA is, or are they going to complete, or how are they going to do? The problem is that itself might predict bad outcome. That would be terrible, but in principle, you see where I'm going with this. We have to think about these folks, and that we're inheriting a history of bad mental health, and we really need to, your students, my students, what do we do to help them?
Yeah, because I think that's the key. I mean,
Right.
in my personal view, it's not don't admit them.
But the danger is some places may decide to do that.
No, and yeah, I mean, I can see how people might argue that, but there's so much amazing potential. And I mean, think about just throughout history.
You mean we can change them? Is that what you mean?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, just first, you just think throughout history of the so many amazing people who struggle with mental illness and how much they've contributed to the world. So you have to think about that piece. And then also, I mean, I think, you know, the small liberal arts model can really help here.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you bring people in, you know, I know some campuses have, for example, they have smaller groups, they have 30 people, and if the norm is to live on campus for all 4 years or even the first 2 years, that those people stick together, and then you have your tribe of people for support who you get those relationships rather than being alone in your phone, you know, maybe scrolling through what your high school friends are doing. So and the clubs and the athletics, just like you're describing, and to take those folks who maybe are not doing those things and try to reach them. And you know, obviously the resources of, you know, having therapists and mental health resources on campus, all of those things. And I'm a huge fan of those classes that are like lifestyle instruction for college. And I think those are more and more needed, you know, of how do you manage your time? How do you do your laundry? How do you manage your sleep schedule? So my oldest is a high school, was a high school senior last year, is a college freshman right now. And I have totally seen this. She had like the most dialed in sleep schedule, and she went to college and like all fell apart. So she's trying to bring it back in and but you know, and her roommate stays up very, very late, and they have their system. But then, you know, there's other things too. So her roommate's a great example. Asked my daughter, like within the first week, said, "Can you show me how to use the washing machine?" Because she had no idea how to use the washing machine. And so like there's all of these things that, you know, college students maybe used to know. And and her roommate only got her driver's license within, you know, like she was 18, almost 19, and was just only getting her driver's license. Just didn't have, and you know, that's what that other data shows. They don't have that experience with independence.
Is Bruce here? Is Bruce here? Maybe. So Bruce has really written lots of really interesting papers, and we're starting to think about it here. You might think that the allocation of roommates might be, I mean, you can randomly allocate roommates, but you might think that we might allocate roommates in a positive way. I mean, you've made
Yeah.
suggestions about, I mean, should someone who's, I don't know, someone who's, you know, really dependent on using the smartphone, and we purposely match them with someone who isn't. I'm not saying you should, but there are things that,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
here we...
No, roommates
we
can make a big
roommates, it
difference.
turns out, make a really big
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah.
Should you match someone who uses the phone a lot with someone who doesn't? I don't know. I mean, they might not like it, but
Yeah.
you would like them not to like it. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, yeah, no. I think. I mean, that's one thing to think about, or you know, letting people. So my daughter's at Cal Poly Pomona, and so they fill out a little description and they choose their own roommates, and that roommate relationship's worked out very well because they both just want to preserve sleep, and so that actually has been fine.
But follow this through.
Yeah.
So we talk about roommates. But what can the institution do?
Mm-hmm.
So here we sit, and we're going to advise the president. Lots of people here, and we've talked about, trying to get them to go out and go skiing. But in a sense, you've talked about personal things, and you've talked about you take your phone and you put it away. I was concerned that perhaps we're doing things. I'm a professor. Perhaps I'm having an impact on this. So your work is really important in this. What can the institution learn? I mean, think about, so the president, here's a story of the president, good example. So the president comes in, and we had a previous president who closed the golf course, God help us, closed the golf course just before COVID, and was going to build a set of dorms 2.5 miles off the campus, right? And then you know how cold it was today. Well, in February it gets colder.
So don't do that.
Right. So these dorms were going to be up on the top of the campus. And our president came in and gave that speech and went, no, we're not doing that. And basically what we have now, if you look around, there's a whole series of buildings being built on the road down to the river and all around. And some people don't like it, but there's a reason. And she read your research, and she's a psychologist, and she said, I want community.
Yes.
What do you think of that? I mean, I think it's great, personally, and I think thank you.
Absolutely.
Bring them up. I mean, I literally said, so you're going to build a set of dorms for the unclean? Their family, we want to bring them in. So that's, in a sense, her view has been that. I want to hear your view. But in a sense, build a community. Surely, build a community in that now we watch you. You don't wander off to somewhere else and you're not left on your own. We, in a sense, we're trying to build a model, which is, if you're down I mean, let me give you another one. I was chatting to people yesterday about how do we identify the people most at risk. And the professors know. I know, you know. You know who's in trouble. You know who doesn't show up to class. You know who doesn't answer a question. You ask them a question and they sit like this, and they don't show up and they make excuses. And we know. But I'm just trying to get to what can we do as an institution? But community seems to me to be a big deal.
Yeah.
And
Totally
Dartmouth
agree.
can really do well at it. Sorry, you go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the amazing thing that residential campuses can do, that very few institutions can. They can take this group of young people and put them together where their phone isn't as enticing anymore because there are all of these other people their age who are interesting people to talk to and be friends with who are right there. And that's amazing. And the specific thing that I heard about at Duke when I was there a couple of years ago, they have that model where the people stay together for at least I think the first 2 years. And I think they have it in some places even 4 years, where they stay with the same group the whole time.
Yeah, I think we got 5 minutes. I was going to hope if maybe people can want a question, but I'm interested in people's views about
Me too.
What's the importance of community. What can we do here? I mean, in a sense, I'm very intrigued by. This is a community we're trying to learn here. In a sense, what we can learn here, perhaps then we can say, let's broaden it out to Lesotho and Bangladesh and so on. Questions from people. How important to students' mental health and others is community? I saw lots of hands when people clapped. Yeah, please.
So my name is Sarah Crockett. I'm an emergency physician and also work in kind of nature-based wellness spaces. But as the person who receives our students in crisis, I can tell you that community is a life-saving intervention. I see it every day, and it's not just your mom saying.
How? Just. I mean, it's great.
Yeah.
How is it a life-saving intervention? It's a fantastic news. I just want to hear more. How?
It keeps our students out of my emergency department in crisis.
Yep.
It decreases. suicide attempts.
Yeah.
Really?
Decreases somatic complaints, so it's not all just mental health
Yeah.
complaints, right? I have students with stress or loneliness who are also coming in with unexplained stomach aches and headaches and jaw pain and all kinds of health
Right.
complaints that we can't explain, and I do believe are related to this loneliness, isolation, screen addiction.
Yeah.
And one thing, you kind of asked the question, well, what can we do
Yeah.
at Dartmouth? I do think we should be kind of the global leader. We are the voice crying in the wilderness, and I feel like we have this incredible resource of nature and close-knit community. But I will say one thing that I've heard from our students is, I hear from the wellness center or you, our physicians, or, be well, get off screens, do this. But then in the classroom, I hear do more, study more, research more, work harder. And sometimes they feel like they're two antithetical messages. So I guess one thought I have is for the faculty, like you said, the people in the classroom, they know who's at risk, and to use the resources we have to embed the wellness message into our academic teaching. It shouldn't be wellness here and teaching here. It needs to be completely unified in
Do
our
you want to respond or should I take another? You
Yeah.
respond.
No, I think
There's
that was great.
another
Yeah.
one there, please.
Yeah.
Just shout.
Hi, I'm a parent of a Dartmouth student, and I have two students in high school. And one thing that I haven't heard mentioned here today is university and college's responsibility in helping to create a crisis of pressure in academics among high school students. My son, who's a senior in high school, had a close friend just in the last month who went through a major depressive episode because of college applications.
Right.
And that's coming from a top-down place. So I'm wondering if you can address that part of it at all, and how are universities addressing this towards, from a top-down level?
We're trying. This is a start. Obviously, a big part of this is we care about everybody's well-being, and we especially care about the most vulnerable. And we have to do things for the most vulnerable, and it's not easy. But I think we are well ahead of the game. It's not easy. Yeah, there's another one there, please. Time for two more. Just can you stand up and shout, because we can't. Just shout.
For 36 years, I've been a child, adolescent, and family psychologist.
Yes, sir.
Just moved up to the Upper Valley.
Yes, sir.
And a few years ago at the New Jersey Psychological Association convention, to me it was very profound. It was a professor and a faculty at Penn Medical School, but who was a psychologist. And they looked at effective treatment interventions for three very different diagnoses: ADHD, dementia, and I think anxiety and depression. And it was up there, but I wanted to ask you about the follow-up. The most effective across all three was exercise.
Right.
Yeah.
But you mentioned it, but it was just in passing. Can you comment about that?
Yeah. So I have a slide which I didn't have in this talk of just like a bunch of ways that high school students could spend their time. And all of the screen activities are linked to more unhappiness. Then you look at happiness, well, what predicts that? Sleep and exercise are the first two. And same thing if you look at depression and suicidal ideation. Those are the biggest protective factors.
100%.
Sleep and exercise.
Any more for any more? Yeah, one there.
I run a summer camp for adolescents.
Yay.
Hi there.
Yay.
And they work.
Yes.
We love them.
It's device-free. And when you ask those kids, do they like the fact that camp is device-free? They love it.
Uh-huh.
Right.
And they love it because no one else has it.
Yes.
And you make them take their cell phones away at the beginning, don't you?
Yes.
You take them away.
Hallelujah. Yeah.
So they love it, and they tell you that they love it and that they prefer that.
Yes.
Because they're not addicted to their phone, they're addicted to their friends. So why don't you, this is a question for you, Dr. Blanchflower, why don't you just say, here at Dartmouth, it's a selective school. If you said part of the application criteria is you agree to give up your cell phone for 4 years of school.
Can I finish you on one? I'll finish you on one thought. And I was talking to Willow yesterday, and I said I was going to make a proposal to the president. Will you support it? And the proposal was this: about 10% of our students who come on Dartmouth trips refuse to go overnight because they won't leave their cell phone behind. And Willow and I are going to propose to the president that you can't graduate from Dartmouth unless you do that.
Interesting.
Thank you, everybody. This was super. We'll take 5 minutes or so because we've got the next session coming, but this was super. Thank you so much, Jean. See you in a bit.
Danny.
These boys are coming now. Thank you.